And welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us for today's webinar, part of the Tennessee Film and Entertainment webinar series, which is hosted by the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville and supported by the Tennessee Entertainment Commission. My name is Jonathan Harwell-Dye. I'm the Director of Programs at the Arts and Business Council, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides business education, resources, and opportunities to the creative community, and also connects the business community to the arts to foster workplace creativity and innovation. Some of our key programs include education programs like the one you're attending today, as well as intensive entrepreneurial training for artists, board training for business professionals to join the boards of arts organizations, an annual professional development conference called Creative Exchange, and we also run the Volunteer Lawyers and Professionals for the Arts for the state of Tennessee. We call it VLPA, and it's a referral service that provides pro bono legal and business assistance to income qualified artists and arts organizations, which includes our monthly Black-owned small business and nonprofit legal clinics, sponsored by Bank of America, Bradley, and the Tennessee Bar Foundation, and quarterly Ask the Expert clinics, the next of which is on May 11th. And you can learn about all of those programs on our website, abcnashville.org. Today's webinar, Understanding Revenue Streams for Filmmakers, is the third webinar in the Tennessee Film and Entertainment webinar series. You'll want to follow the Arts and Business Council on social media, as well as the Tennessee Entertainment Commission. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website and get notified about each of these webinars and all of our education programs. If you have not noticed already, we do have closed captioning turned on through live transcripts. So it is an automated closed captioning. If it's not enabled for you, usually you can turn that on in the bottom right of your screen. So if you need to turn on that closed captioning, you can do so probably down there, but sometimes that button's in a different place depending on your device. And now I'm going to play a short video from our funders, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission. So I'm going to pull that up now and share that video. So I always want to call out that number, $6 billion. The entertainment industry brings about a $6 billion annual impact to the state of Tennessee. That's a big number. And one of the reasons that we work so closely with the Tennessee Entertainment Commission to support film, to support gaming, to support the music industry, all of those. And so thank you to the Tennessee Entertainment Commission for putting together that video and for supporting all of these wonderful industries. And I'm hearing, I just read an article that says there's going to be a new announcement on some incentives. So I'm excited to learn about that when that goes public too. So looking forward to that. Everybody that's on this, be on the lookout for that announcement from them very soon. We're going to jump right into the panel though. I want to have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the topic at hand. But I'm going to start with Courtney Sabatini. Courtney, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and the company you work with?
Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney Sabatini. I am the lawyer on the panel. I've been a film and television attorney for about 10 years. I was in LA. I moved to the Nashville area about 5.5 years ago with my family. And I had been consulting from here for LA studios for the past 5.5 years. And I just recently decided to start my own firm to make a name for myself here in town instead of, continuing to work solely with the coasts. So I'm now the founder of Tennessee Entertainment Law, and I am just growing my practice and looking forward to working with more people in Tennessee.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for being here today. I'm going to go next to Nick Barnes. Nick, will you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and the organization you work with.
Of course. I'm Nick Barnes. I'm an agent at United Talent Agency. I'm also a sixth generation Middle Tennessean, native Nashvilleian. Not many of us left these days. I run a department at UTA called Heartland, which I created about 4 years ago. And that exists to lift up creators that are on the coasts, that are in the South and throughout the Midwest and other areas that are either making content that's endemic to those people in those areas, or they are natives in those areas themselves. In the context of this conversation today, I represent clients like the Irwin brothers, who have overall deal at Lionsgate, and are filmmakers here in Middle Tennessee. Filmmakers like Gabe Vasquez and Roman White, who just had A Week Away on Netflix. Dallas Jenkins, creator of The Chosen. On and on. I've got people in unscripted like the Duck Dynasty family, Kathy Gifford, and others.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for being here today. And it's always good to see a native to the area, because y'all are unicorns now. All right. And so I'm going to also introduce Christopher Barkley. Chris, will you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your company as well?
Absolutely. And I am also a native Nashvilleian.
Look at that.
Been here my entire life. And I don't know if I should introduce for both me and Nick, because the other guy on the panel's name is Nick Buggs, and he is my partner. And we both co-founded the company Bonsai Creative. We are an independent branding and marketing firm. We also have a 5-star podcast named Make It. We do panels and keynotes and workshops for festivals all around the country. We also have 3 feature films that have made it to distribution, and you can watch anytime. We have invested in a variety of films beyond that as well. We do regular consults with independent filmmakers. So we are very much boots on the ground. And I think in the context of this conversation, we can speak to that revenue journey as an independent filmmaker, where you're going to try to write and produce a movie without the help and assistance of a studio.
Thanks, Chris. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself as well? Talk a little bit about the business that you share with Chris.
No, that's okay. I think you did a good job. No, I'll go ahead. Yeah, hey folks, I am the other Nick on the line. It's just that my hair doesn't look as good. Look, yeah, there it is. There it is. I am the other half of Bonsai Creative and the other half of the Make It podcast, as Chris mentioned. I think in addition to the things that we do for a living, I think I would say this, that we are really trying to change the game for the independent filmmaker. That's through outreach like this and engagement with folks that you see on the screen, partnerships with individuals like you see, as well as film festivals and anyone who's really trying to be an advocate for independent creatives. So, we do have we have business goals, but we really have a creative mission that we're trying to really move forward with, this year, next year, and the years to come. We got a lot of work to do together. So let's make it happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And I'm going to jump right into it, because the first, the way that I'm going to kind of structure the questions today for everybody that's listening, as well as the panelists, is we're going to talk a little bit about historic models, the current situation, and kind of what to predict for the future, what people think may be coming in the future, what the data says. No one can predict it exactly. We were earlier just talking about a weather app that 10 days ago said it was going to be sunny outside in Nashville today, and it was completely wrong. So, but we do have some great minds here who can share a little bit about where the trends seem to be leading us. But let's start with the historical revenue streams for both film and television and what that's looked like historically. Courtney, I'm going to ask you to kind of talk about that, if you will.
Yeah, so in the past, I'll start with TV. So in the past, you're a studio, you create a show, you license it to a broadcast network, right? NBC, Fox, CBS, ABC. That's where the majority of people were getting their primary television content. Once a show hits usually 100 episodes, the studio then has the right to syndicate it. So that's why you can't go a day without seeing an episode of Friends, an episode of Seinfeld, an episode of Big Bang Theory on TBS, for example. the studio would also retain the right to sell in foreign markets, right? I think a good example of this for anybody who saw Eurotrip, it happened to be one of those movies that came out when I was in college, high school or college. You know, when they're in Bratislava and he's like, Miami Vice just came here, right? That was 20 years later, but the studio can still sell. So there's that downstream revenue. So that was kind of how it worked in television. Then SVOD, you know, the streaming services came along. If I call them SVOD, I'm sorry, it stands for subscription video on demand, but it's just the streaming platforms. And that's why you could find Friends on Netflix, now on HBO Max, or The Office, right, was on Netflix, now on Peacock. So that's how it was historically and how it changed about 10 years ago with the advent of Netflix. That was just a new place that the studios could license their content. Theatrical films, I'm going to leave indie for the indie experts, but the theatrical films, the blockbuster sort of movies, would typically go from, they would go into theaters, then there would be a pay cable or pay-per-view window, right? It would go to HBO, Showtime, Stars. Then it would come out on home video. So DVD, Blu-ray, VHS back in the day, right? Whatever the home video media was at the time. And then it would go to free cable. So again, TBS, FX, AMC, the kind of standard places where you could go and watch a movie. This could be done in every territory throughout the world, right? The studio was not entering into these worldwide distribution agreements. They could, with like a Paramount or Universal, which would have the right to do the theatrical. But again, the downstream was up to the filmmakers, the creators, the people who owned the rights in that property. Again, could also go to a streaming platform once those came into existence. So that's why you'll see the Harry Potter series, for example, that's been on all the streaming platforms at some point. I think right now it's living on a couple, but it's not the same as it is now, which I know is what we're going to move into, creating a show or a movie specifically for Netflix or Peacock or Paramount Plus, or I could keep naming them. There are like 12. And that's kind of, again, historically how it worked. There was step 1, step 2, step 3. It kind of all went in a very clear, there was a clear path and clear streams of revenue that filmmakers could expect to exploit. And depending on how well you did at the upper tiers, you had more leverage for negotiating for better deals downstream.
So, for example, if something had a very strong theatrical release, then that would mean more money when it went down the different services.
It could. It would give them more leverage when negotiating the licensing deal for HBO, right? And not always, because some of those were done as packages. So, for example, HBO would get a slate of movies. So you might be slated with one that did really well, one that didn't do so well, and you kind of have to average out those prices. But yes, it would increase your negotiating leverage. And again, as a lawyer, you'll hear me say it multiple times, depends what's in the contract.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. Chris and Nick, on the independent side, is there anything you would like to add, thinking about this from sort of the independent film side in a historical context, as far as independent film?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's interesting that the typical way an independent film works isn't the best practice. Which, let me explain. Let me dig in, because normally what happens is you're an independent filmmaker. You wrote the script, which means you're probably the writer director. So, and then you bring your buddies in who are also in film and creative. Usually, your producer is your best friend, or someone you've worked with professionally and you really respect. So you go into pre-pro, you go into this sort of raise mode where you're trying to get equity investors. Then you go into principal photography, get your film made. Then you spend twice as long in post as a normal film would, because maybe your editor is doing you a favor. Maybe they're on a million jobs because you couldn't afford to pay as much. The scoring takes longer. It's harder because you're not going to be able to pay as much to get the quality scoring that you need. By the way, if you spend $50,000 in Nashville, you get 37.5% rebate back. So scoring in Nashville is really advantageous, and you get the world's best musicians on top of that. So it's like icing. But then you have your film and you take it to a festival and you try to get in the big boys. And when Cannes doesn't take you, or Toronto or Sundance doesn't, or they do, you take it from there, and then you hope to try to sell it at the festival, whatever you go to. For the sake of this conversation, let's say you get into NAF and you win at NAF, and the feeling is super high. You've won the Tennessee Audience Award. You're doing great, and you're riding a high. One thing Courtney said really stood out to me. Well, a couple of things actually, but the one thing that stood out to me right away was adding value to your picture. So it had a theatrical run, so now you have more leverage at the negotiating table. Well, what happens to indies is we have no idea what our film is worth, and therefore any price given to us is the value of the film. And we have to change that. Let's just put that out there, that we need to empower ourselves to know what our film is worth when we walk in to a room, and not just say, hey, this is the budget, this is what it's worth, but no, what is it worth in the market, and have real data and analytics that can back that argument up, so that you have a little bit more power versus being wooed by some grifter at the festival who's going to pay you no money up front in exchange for your IP for 10 to 15 years. And so even though that's the typical path for an independent filmmaker, it's not a path to profitability. So if you go back to the beginning, what should happen in pre-pro is that you should focus hard on going to the markets like AFM and others, put your name out there, try to get a young, hungry sales agent. The established ones might not want to, work with you, but a young, hungry agent trying to make a name for themselves will work for you. Get an entertainment lawyer right up front. Think about how you want to brand and market your movie up front before you shoot anything, before you do anything. Get at least one attachment that you can go to the bank on, literally the bank, because you might want to debt finance part of your movie instead of equity, do an equity raise that you can bank on to be in your film. Okay, they don't want to do it off SAG, fine. That means your budget's $2 million or lower. Okay, but then the key is to make your $1 million film look like a $5 million film, so that Netflix will look at it if you want to go that route, because they won't look at anything that's 3 million or below. It's like 3 to 10, right? So it just depends on how you want to go. But the whole point is your financial structure has to be set, and your branding and marketing structure needs to be set, and your targets for distribution need to be set before you roll sound and shoot one image, and then you're on a path to profitability.
Let me interject.
Did I leave anything out?
I want to interject one thing. Oh, so go
Okay.
ahead, Nick. Other Nick.
No, Nick, you're up.
Both Nicks.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick. You got
Well,
it.
just a point from the agency side that you mentioned getting an attachment, and something that I see from indie filmmakers across my desk often is some kind of hyperbole around who is attached to a project. We're in negotiations for the lead with this person or that. That's a hallmark of something that we see and instantly makes us think this is somebody that's trying to use word magic to think we have someone attached. And usually if it's something good, we'll call. I mean, happened to me just yesterday. That's why it's top of mind. Someone said, we're in negotiation for this actor, big actor, for a lead role. Well, I'm friends with that actor's agent. And I picked up the phone and said, hey, are they doing this? And she was like, I've never heard of that. Let me call the manager. And the manager says, I mean, it's on their desk. I don't even think they've read it yet. And this person's email was like, you know, we're one yes away. So
Right.
I just a word of caution to be really transparent about it, because that's something that when I see that, it throws up a red flag immediately, and that kind of colors the way I read the rest of the email.
Nice.
Yeah,
So
that's a great point. It's
Hey,
not
Chris,
an
I'll just offer
episode of
this one thing.
Entourage, right, Nick?
Yeah.
It's like we'll get some indie folks that just will do what Nick said, and we've been told, hey, you have 24 hours to send us a $75,000 check or you're out. And I said, oh, well, then we're out.
We're out. Yeah. Yeah. So when we talk historical, so I'll just offer this real quick and we can move to the next thing, which is historically, the film festivals and markets, I think, was the place where people could go, right, to be discovered. There's a lot more content out there now, you know, whether it's on the big screen or the small screens. So there's a lot more distractions. There's a lot more places to get content. There's a lot more of these influencers who are creating content and becoming attractive to the folks who are putting things in the theater or on the big screen. So it's not that easy anymore to say, hey, I've got this great film and went to a festival. It got found, right? It's a different model. It's a different market now. Again, the streamers are the ones, or the distributors are the ones making the content now. So they may not be going to those festivals to look for your content anymore. So I think that that's a big shift. And I think the mindset, or that needs to happen in the mindset of independent creators, is that you can't just make it, go to a festival, expect to be discovered, and then that's it, right? And then you make your mint on your film. It's not the way to go. Again, it gets back to some of the stuff that Chris said that you have to do. You have to be more of an advocate for yourself in the new world of filmmaking.
Thank you, Nick. So yeah, let's talk about how the world's changing and how it's really, I think the last couple of years have really made a lot of those changes happen faster than maybe they would have if we hadn't had a global pandemic. But Courtney, I'll come back to you and ask you about this in terms of, you know, what is the current state of theatrical releases, and how is that different now that people weren't going to theaters for a long time? It seems now that people are mainly going for sort of bigger films. What does that look like today in terms of the theatrical release specifically?
You know, it's a great question, because we've had two very strange years, right? And a lot of movies got pushed. Some ended up released on Disney Plus that were original. I mean, there was a Scarlett Johansson lawsuit about it, right? Got pushed to Disney Plus instead of being released theatrically. A lot of the kind of genre movies that are often Oscar contenders, a lot of them didn't have this big theatrical release. You don't have the rom-coms, you don't have the, you know, historical drama, the kind of weird, kind of more low budget sci-fi stuff. None of that's really come out in the past 2 years. You can find them on Netflix, you can find them on again Disney Plus, but you're not seeing them in the theaters. The only, and I know I talked to you about this, Jonathan, the only caveat, I think, the only standout is horror. For whatever reason, horror can be done very cheap, and it has a built-in audience, and it's an event, right? You go, you see a horror movie for Halloween. That, I think that genre is going to continue doing well theatrically. I don't know if we're going to see, I don't know if a 10 Things I Hate About You or How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, I don't know if that would succeed and do well in theaters these days. It costs just as much to go to the theater these days as it does to get in a subscription to all the different platforms. So, you know, a lot of people just don't seem to think it's worth it. And especially with COVID, people weren't willing to take that risk when they had plenty of content available at home.
Well, and that really that really is analogous to the research that we have inside of our agency. And we have an internal research group called UTIQ. And, look, movies are a tentpole of our business. And so everyone got super scared in the middle of COVID, and staff reductions, salary cuts, everybody pulling back, trying to figure out what's going on amidst a writer strike with the guild. And that was another kind of wrench in there that was happening. And our research really shows, to back up what Courtney's saying, that women aren't coming to the theaters anymore. Historically, women would support tent poles like rom-coms, faith movies, other things that are very female forward, and they're just not coming anymore. The thing, and now I'm painting with a broad brush, but that's kind of the broad strokes. And what we're seeing, really, to echo and even further what Courtney said, is big tentpole IP is what's doing well. I mean, Spider-Man's sitting at $802 million in the box office as of this weekend. Batman's at $349 million. So many other titles have come out that are barely scratching the surface. I had my client's movie, American Underdog, out in theaters and in Christmas, and we we're in the 20s, I think 26 million. And I think pre-pandemic, that might have been a $75 million movie. I really believe it. So that's the trend that we're seeing. And a lot of those people, to further Courtney's point, I'm just here to back Courtney up today. That's my role.
I appreciate this. You have actual numbers.
To Courtney's point, we're just seeing a lot of that stuff go straight to the streamers. And, especially with you mentioned the Scarlett Johansson lawsuit, the windowing strategy that came out in the first few months of COVID is you can't put that back in the bag. I mean, that is now kind of changed the face of theatrical exhibition. And, it's no longer going to be a big money grab for a long time in the theaters, which is going to push budgets down lower and appetite for acquisition over the next decade. And speaking to that, I mean, everyone is bought a lot. If you had something going on during COVID that was ready, people were buying. And on the television side, it's the same way. In the scripted TV world, is the buyer landscape has gotten tighter. I hear from the TV lit agents that the buyer landscape is tighter than it's ever been, because people are loaded. They loaded the box in the past 2 years, and now they're like, well, let's get through this stuff a little bit and see how it works. And so, we are just working triple as hard just to get something sold, or not into development and straight to series. It's really like the straight to series phrase is one uttered very infrequently these days.
So, Nick, will you talk a little bit about that windowing strategy and what it was, and then what was the cat that was let out of the bag, so to speak, with the pandemic, and how is that they've tried to maybe put that back and not been able to?
Well, look, I'm no expert in exhibition, but I will say that, we used to have these really long windows in the theaters, and they're either doing, day and date simultaneous release, or just really, really tightening the window down to, 30 days or so. And then they're going to streaming. And, I think this is a greater symptom of the consolidation that's happened in the media business. And so many big companies are eating each other up. And now these companies also own tech platforms. And so it's, it's not really cannibalization anymore when you own the other means of distribution,
I think one of the best examples of what Nick is saying is when Trolls 2 World Tour came out. For anyone who has kids, you could rent it for 48 hours for less than the cost that it would have taken your entire family to go see it. So all the moms like me, I've got a 5-year-old, right? I'm not going to take my kid to the theater in the middle of a pandemic. I'm going to pay $40 and she can watch it for 48 hours straight, which, let me tell you, 5-year-olds will do. And when you get used to having that content available right away in your own home, you can sit there in your pajamas, have all the snacks you want for the same price that it would cost to go as a family to the theater. A lot of people are making the decision to do that. So even if that movie, for example, had been released in theaters for a 30-day window, like Nick was saying, I probably would have waited 30 days to see it in the comfort of my own home. And that's kind of, once you get used to that, it's hard to go backwards and say, no, I have to see it opening weekend. It's not Game of Thrones. People aren't going to be talking about it at the water cooler, right? You're not missing an episode and then you're behind for weeks. It's one movie. And it's just a different world when you get used to, I mean, people blame millennials, right? We want things available immediately. We only have the attention span of 140 characters. So if you can give me 140 characters, if you can give me the movie available that day, I'm going to do it that way.
Yeah, and it's also just a confluence of things happening culturally that are creating a squeeze on both sides. So, pressure on all sides, I should say, for the theatrical business and the movie business in general. And if, for those who are wondering what the impetus is and like, why is this so important to talk about theaters? It's because it's the one place we know of where an artist can get fair market value for their work. If you have a movie that goes to the theater and you, to Courtney's point, you take your family, you're going to spend $100 potentially in box office and concessions for that night out. If you stay at home, it's more comforting for you as a viewer, potentially, depending on what your TV or theater setup is. But that artist is going to get paid if they didn't get a deal. Like Trolls World Tour obviously is completely different ballpark. But like, let's say you're an indie filmmaker, you're going to make between 1 and 12 cents per 90 minutes streamed on Amazon, just for example. It's actually class action lawsuit worthy, in my opinion. It's orders and orders of magnitude less than what you would get in a theater. And so because the vast difference between those market values exist, we really need the theaters to win. We need theaters to exist and be able to be an exhibition window for a variety of genres of films. But the squeeze is tough because women aren't going to the theater, partly a little bit because of COVID, like Courtney's saying, but I also think it's this phenomenon that's happening between young men and women now. A theater was a place where you took your date. Well, they're not having sex anymore. That's proven. That data's out there. Even married couples, are having sex. 50% now are having sex less than once a month. So why am I going to the movies? I don't have a girl to take. Why? Because if I'm a young man, I'm on social media. I know now that I can be shamed at scale if I fail to hit on this girl or hit on this guy or get this number. And I don't want to risk being shamed at scale. So I don't have someone I'm dating. I don't have someone I'm in relationship with. So they're not going to the movies with me, right? Then you combine that with inflation currently. How will that affect ticket prices when that comes to roost? Talk about people who want to go to movies. It's traditionally been 19 to 24-year-old men because you can get them out of the house and they don't care. If I eat a bag of popcorn, I feel guilty. I feel like I took a year off my life, right? I was like, man, I hope it was worth it. But if I'm a 19 to 24-year-old man, I don't care at all. I'm getting 2 bags and bragging about it and 2 sodas. And that density is what's really great for theaters, because theaters is a real estate business. So they need that density. They need those people in the room. Well, now who's coming to the movies is probably stretched out to 19 to 35-year-old, but they're incels. They're going to watch tentpole movies. And the reason why is because those movies are larger than life. And therefore it's required to watch them on a big screen. We need to see it on a big screen. I thoroughly enjoyed Spider-Man, to Nick's point. I really enjoyed it. I loved it. The people behind me were having a visceral reaction to the movie. They were screaming out loud on plot points. So they're not just, and some of us, look, I've loved Spider-Man my whole life, so I could be in that group, but this was really big for them. They couldn't make that outburst at home. It would be unusual. So when you're with a group of friends, mostly guys, to Nick's point, and you're watching this big tentpole movie, you can be emotional, you can be fun. and have and be sort of one more layer deep than the lay person that's just going to go watch the next Spider-Man movie. So there's just a lot of things happening. Oh, and maybe the last point I should say that's part of this confluence is, again, to Courtney hinted at it, kids are accustomed to screens big and small. I've got 3 kids, 21, 19, 12. It started with my 21-year-old. She would rather sit in her room and watch the movie on her computer than go to the theater or go to our theater in my house. We can't compare us to them. To us, we remember that nostalgic feeling of going to the theater and loving it, and they don't have that feeling. They never had it. They always had the internet. They always had an iPad or a phone to watch their TV and movies on. And now it's up to us as creatives to adjust to that new world.
Yeah, and offer one thing to that is just that what we used to have, you probably heard the term theatrical experience, right? Because that's what it was. It was an experience, but it was a very human experience. And as Courtney said, it's like we had the last 2 years, very weird stuff, right? It's like, this is kind of unnatural because it was not human, right? We were looking at each other through, plexiglass and distancing 6 feet and wearing masks. We couldn't see each other. These weren't human experiences anymore. So we've shifted away from that. I think there's still an opportunity there. I think that a lot of the conversation was like, hey, man, we lost it. It's different. We're gone from that now. I think we're all like inside. We want it back, right? We're ready to have that back. And I think that there's an opportunity to make it an experience again. This is why Spider-Man did so well in the theater. It wasn't just because it was a tentpole movie or it was phenomenal on the screen. It was because we could experience this with other people, some of whom we didn't know, right? Sometimes it's about the family. You can stay at home. But when it's that other guy who's behind you, who's clapping as emphatically as you are, and you have no clue who this person is, it brings you back to your community, right? It creates another human connection. It creates a human experience. And I really do believe that, especially with independent film, that's an area that we should be capitalizing on. Let's save the theaters to the degree that independent film can bring real human experiences to the screen so that we can all have real human theatrical experiences again. Courtney?
Oh no, I think it's a brilliant idea. I was just going to comment on what Chris had said. It's not just that our kids are used to different size screens, it's also that they're watching different content. My 5-year-old will watch videos of other people playing with toys that she has in her playroom. And I'm like, why are you not playing with the toy? Why are you watching someone else play with this toy? I don't know. It's just more interesting. Okay. And then she'll go and she'll play with her toy the way that this other kid had. And, I guess she's learning. I don't know. But it's weird. And that's not something that you're going to have in theaters. Or if you do, then I seriously have problems with where we're going as a creative community. But yeah, I mean, again, my kid is 5. I work in this industry and she has never been to a movie theater in her life.
That's amazing. And to the chat, Bradley, I completely agree with you. Brad wrote, I think that's why comedy and horror will always be theater films, collective experience of jumping or laughing. And I would say to anybody, listen or watch someone in front of you laugh, truly laugh, and then try not to smile. Can't do it. You don't even know what's funny.
Bradley also
They're
wrote,
laughing, you're going to laugh.
Netflix and chill has taken a portion of the market share towards seeing a movie as a date. And I think, back to the Netflix of it, I told, when Jonathan and I were preparing for this, I told a story about I got him Will Page. He's an economist, and he was formerly the chief economist for Spotify for a while. And he's one of those kind of celebrity economist minds. And he told me a story because he's writing a book, and he was consulting for the owner of the Atlanta Falcons. And the Atlanta Falcons have spent a lot of time like really trying to innovate their experience and, bringing like local restaurants in and bringing like just new ways of thinking around a stadium. And what Will helped explain to him was he's not competing with the Braves or some other sports franchise in Atlanta. He's competing with Netflix. Netflix is everyone's competitor right now.
Yep.
It's because it's so much easier. He calls it, he's writing a book on it right now, and he calls it the pajama theorem. We would rather stay in our pajamas and watch Netflix than do most other things, because it's so much easier and so much more accessible. And so I think that's something that I often think about, is like, how does this fit into that world? And look, we're lucky enough to sell things to them, to Netflix, into that streaming world. But I think, in this context, we should probably center back around independent filmmakers and how that it applies to us. I mean, I think that we're not really talking about making more Spider-Mans here. I think we're talking about how to succeed in the indie world. Jonathan, back to you.
Thanks, Nick.
Nice.
Well, yeah, let's bring it back to revenue, because let's talk about the fact that people aren't going to theaters right now, and that theatrical release was such an important part of how you got that downstream revenue. So now it's impacting everything downstream. So what is the new model if the theatrical release isn't going to set the bar for a film? What's the new model? How are filmmakers recouping? There's a ton of films that are going straight to Netflix, straight to streamers. Courtney, I'll ask you to kind of speak on this first, but what's that model look like to generate revenue that doesn't rely on beginning with a theatrical release?
Right. So I do want to speak directly to Netflix, both on the film side and the television side. In the past, you had this movie, it had this theatrical release, right? I went through the whole historical model. You then, oh, great, now I'm going to license it to a streamer. We'll use Netflix as an example because, we all have been, right? Great, now I'm going to license it to a streamer. They're going to get to have it on their platform for 10 years, and we're going to make this many dollars. Now, this is already on top of what we've made in theatrical, what we've made in DVD, what we've made foreign, right? This was an additional source of revenue. Now you have a whole lot of people who are making what Netflix is calling Netflix original movies, right? Netflix original shows. I mean, on Netflix specifically, it started with House of Cards, but now they have, I was talking about rom-coms earlier, they've got a whole slate of rom-coms geared at teens, right? To All the Boys I Loved Before. I mean, I don't know what audience I'm speaking to here, probably not teenagers, but there's a ridiculous number of teen rom-coms, and it's because they're cheap. And so what Netflix is doing is, instead of licensing those movies, they're doing a full buyout. Hey, filmmaker, you've got this cute little rom-com that you can do for $3 million, let's say. Great, we will pay you $3 million. We will fully cover your budget. Plus we'll give you this little minor percentage. You don't lose any money on your movie. You make a little bit. Your investors are happy because they get, they recoup, but you're never but it's a full buyout, and it's a worldwide buyout, right? Netflix is everywhere. So you no longer have this, okay, great, I'll sell it to Paramount in the US. They'll release it theatrically here. I'll sell it to this completely different company in China. Oh, now it's going to go to HBO in this territory versus, no, Netflix gets all of it. I want a worldwide perpetual right to exhibit your movie on my platform. You have no further sources of downstream revenue, right? So instead of all the different buckets, there's one bucket. All of your money is coming up front. It's a good way to go if you are simply risk averse, right? You don't lose money. Netflix covers your budget and gives you some return on your investment, but you are never going to make the types of money that, for example, Napoleon Dynamite made, right? An indie movie ended up becoming this big, magical, Chris and I were talking about this yesterday, unicorn. It was a unicorn. It did amazingly well for everybody who had invested in that movie. You're just not going to get that through Netflix. You don't lose money, but you don't make a lot either.
So let me play devil's advocate here. Ooh, like it. I had a client movie last year. So it gives some real budget numbers. I'm not going to tell you who, but I've seen Courtney's example, modest fee on top. But this client movie was an indie, it's a $2 million indie. Netflix paid $7 million for it, which I think is a pretty good return. Now, the devil's advocate piece is this: unfair, some of these deals, but if you get a movie on Netflix, it's a big deal. And for other clients I've had, they've been willing to take that risk because they can have that as a calling card to raise for their next film. So I just think that is something that's like, you know, for better or for worse, that's the market, and being able to say you've had a movie on Netflix is pretty cool. Now, digging further, is it cool? Do they even promote your movie on Netflix? I've had filmmakers that say, I can't even find my movie on Netflix when I go on Netflix, which I think is really fascinating, that how the algorithm shows things to different people. You would think that they would take all the people in a project and plug them into their system and it'd come up first when you logged in, but they don't do that. But I'm just pointing out that while unfair, it is also cool to have a movie on the biggest streaming service in the world.
I never said it's unfair. I just said you're
Well,
not going to have some massive.
You're right. You did not say
never
that.
said it
I
was
put words in
unfair.
your mouth.
Again, it's a great way. It's a great way to do it. You have no downside.
But
You
it
don't
is
lose money.
it is not high risk, high reward, where you can
Right.
if you have a hit, you're cashing in and splitting
Yes.
up your ancillaries across the world and etc.
Yes.
I want to
Low
point out
risk, low reward.
I want to point out one thing that, by the way, I have to go at 4 o'clock. So I just want to just jump in a couple of things. I've got some clients that are making money on, making decent money on AVOD. And I haven't heard that mentioned much here at all, or if even on this call yet. But I just want to point out that, you know, our research also shows that, you know, while a big population of Americans have, and this is US specific, a big
Nick,
population.
can you explain what that acronym stands for?
Advertising supported video on demand, just like Courtney called SVOD earlier, which is streaming video on demand, which would be like a Netflix. AVOD would be Peacock, Tubi, Vudu, YouTube, many other, Crackle, many other, sometimes called lower tier streaming services, but these AVOD services are advertising supported. And what our research shows us is that while many Americans have Netflix, a big swath of Americans only have one paid streaming service. So outside of Netflix, where else are they going? They're looking for other places to watch movies and TV. And those AVOD services are much easier barrier to entry distribution model. And while you're not making millions and millions of dollars, sometimes, you know, I've got clients getting checks for $20,000 a month, $200,000 a month, you know, even on a small scale, $10,000 a month. But it is an annuity over time. And I think that it's definitely a window that I save for the very end of a project, but I think it is one that we should discuss. No one likes it. Silence. No one likes it. Everyone hates it.
I agree completely with what you said. We had one of our films on Netflix, and it was a very similar situation in terms of it's like to sort of shine a light on what Courtney's point is. It's like, what if you knew you had Tesla or Uber, but you went this other route that capped your earnings at 5 million when they could have been 500 billion, right? That's what Netflix is going to do. And it's not that your movie didn't make $500 billion. It's that money has now been transferred to Netflix. That earnings potential has been transferred to Netflix. And to Nick's point, hey, if you roll the dice and think you have Tesla or Uber and you don't, you just lost all your investors. That's going to really put a damper on your ability to make a second film or a third film, wherever you are in your journey. And sometimes it's good to get a base hit or a double and then come back and hit that home run with your next film, because now, hey, you've got a film on Netflix, and you made some people whole with your art.
Yeah, and to that one, I'd say that, for many, like you said, Netflix, it's really cool to get on Netflix, right? Like that's the idea. Well, it could be that shining light, it's like that's the North Star, but it's potentially that shining light is actually blinding, right? It's actually too bright, and it's blinding folks from all of the other options, like Nick was mentioning, that are out there. So I would say that, I don't know what kind of TVs folks have, but I feel like one of the best types of TVs to have at home is a Roku TV, right? And why is that? Because they don't hide the fact that there are, 500 different apps out there for you to stream your content on, right? You get one of these non-Roku TVs, you kind of feel like, oh, that's all there is. It's Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Peacock, and that's it. But that's not the case, right? So all of those different applications are out there. Go ahead, Nick.
And to give a real world example of the blinding light that other Nick is talking about, had a client that had a movie on Netflix last year. They were top 5 in the US for one weekend, number 1 ex-US in 3 countries. Sequel conversation came up about, and Netflix said, yeah, I don't think we're interested. And we got a top 5 movie. And Netflix said, well, you had a top 5 movie for the weekend, but you need a top 5 movie for the month if you really want us to pay attention. So I think that while it is a calling card, like it's really, really only for like the top percentage of performers on there that really, really makes a difference. That's right. And, to Courtney's point, it's a full buyout. So, I think someone I saw, Allie on here, had a question about a musical she has. I mean, let's say you had a musical. I mean, if you wanted to tour that musical, sorry, Netflix has those rights. You want to make merch on that? They got those too. They've got everything.
Yeah, back to what Courtney said again, it depends on the contract.
It does.
Yep.
It all does, right? What rights do you have to be involved in a sequel? Well, it's your movie. Maybe you have a first opportunity to write it. Maybe you have a first opportunity to serve as the production company who actually does the movie, but maybe you don't. If you have no leverage, when you're at the negotiating table with Netflix, they're going to say, nope, we've got people we like to work with. If this movie does really well, then we're gonna take it from there with the people who we know and trust. Great job. You guys did a great job. Now we're going to go make money on it.
Thank you. And this is a great advertisement for, you really need an entertainment attorney in your corner.
Yeah, that's right. And someone you engage throughout the process, not just at the end. I think one of the things that, Chris and I definitely learned in the process of not just the filmmaking, but distribution, is that filmmakers get tired, right? They get tired of the process. You make this film over the course of 9 months to a year. I always like to, let's say you took 9 months, right? It's like, you're going to have a baby. 9 months can be hard. There's a lot that happens over that period of time. And finally, when you give birth to this baby, you could be exhausted, and one of these distributors comes along and someone says, hey, I'll take your baby. I will take care of your baby. And then you're like, I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. Here, take my baby. But you didn't have someone in your corner saying, hey, that person's not going to take care of your baby. That person's going to take your baby. Like no. Look at what they're going to do, right? Look at the details of this contract. This is, they're taking it for the next 15 years. Your baby's gone through high school, right? Gone from you. There's nothing you can do. And, we always say you need that support to say, hey, don't take my baby. Make sure that, we've got the details in the contract to make sure that I can retain some level of rights, sequels, ancillary products, whatever it is. But go ahead, Nick.
Courtney's gonna like this. I think she will. Another thing I see occasionally in indie filmmakers is they will go with a lawyer for something like this that has limited experience negotiating against a Netflix or something like that. And as Courtney says, depends on what's in the contract. Every time one of these deals is written, it's different. You really need to ask your attorney or the group practice, do they have a lot of experience negotiating against these kinds of things? Because knowing what the precedents are, knowing what they've seen get passed in other deals before, having a good, litmus test for what they think they can get passed is makes a big difference. And somebody that's never done it before, like, it's tough.
It's a great
These
point.
contracts, they're not
Go ahead, Court.
fun. I mean, they're 60 pages long. Like someone who's never done it before, they're going to miss something. They
Yep.
might catch all the things that are in there, but what's missing from the contract that should be in there, that you want to be in there? Just reading the contract, but not knowing what it should say, it is a big problem.
Yeah, Nick and I always say, don't get a entertainment lawyer, get your entertainment lawyer, because we have seen where someone gets a entertainment lawyer and they don't see anything illegal in the contract. Looks good to me, sign it. Yeah, how about somebody who's advocating for you, putting something in there that gets you a win or two within the contract, and is really that lawyer is in your camp, in your corner professionally. So this lawyer's not a mercenary. They're not just trying to get through those 60 pages and see if anything is fraudulent, but they're actually saying, hey, I'm thinking about you 3 years down the line. What's this going to look like? It's nuanced, but it's critical to look at it. And we're not lawyers, but we've been brought in to take a look at contracts many times, more times than we deserve. And we'll say, hey, you want to take a look at this clause here about what happens to your movie if this independent distributor goes bankrupt. They get bankrupt and get bought out all the time. Well, we don't really want to change that. Well, why not? Like, well, they're pushing back. Well, if they're pushing back, it means it's important. Have them change it to the other version of that bankruptcy law so the film goes back to you. Because it might look innocuous, it might look really tame, but if you ask to change it and they won't change it, there's a reason for that.
We got to jump, guys. Is there any, that's great, Chris. Very, very sage advice. Does anybody have any burning questions for agency side before I jump?
Nick, the only other thing I want to ask.
Ringing there. Are you hear that?
All right.
Classic agency. No, it's good. Phone's always ringing.
So I'll throw this there. The big thing I wanted to ask about is kind of pivot towards this independent filmmaker discussion, because I can tell by the questions that are starting to come in that we have a fair amount of independent filmmakers. But in the process, something that we had talked about before, Nick, is, testing IP on audio only, podcasting. How do you get yourself set up for that? And so I wanted to see if you could touch on that, and then we'll kind of dig in as a group after you leave.
Sure, this is a great exit because I'm actually jumping for a podcast IP call. How about that? So one thing that we're seeing a lot of, that I'm doing a lot of specifically, what John was talking about, is incubation of intellectual property in other forms. So, television is the hardest. Features are slightly easier. I would say slightly, but they're all hard. But TV is like the holy grail. And we have a lot of IP coming in that we're like, well, maybe this would make good television. And then you don't want to be stuck in development hell for 5 years and be on someone's development slate that might never come out. But you want to prove yourself, and you also want to make IP, actually in the parlance of legal terms. So sometimes we'll find a story. We'll option that story. We'll option someone's life rights. We'll do something, and then we'll make it into a narrative podcast. Narrative podcasting is a very hot thing at the moment. It's coming back in a big way. And we're seeing a lot of this get bought straight to series. A good example would be, we represent the podcast group Wondery. And so we've been able to, The Shrink Next Door, Dr. Death, we've been able to go straight to series because we've already proven it. We've already built an audience. It's so much easier to build an audience, to not build an audience, but to build a final version of that in audio only. It's like it's not as simple as a table read, but kind of. You've got people in the studio, you put some sound effects on, you've got some sound, somebody does the soundtrack behind it, and you've got a series with no visuals. And it's just a really great way to build and incubate IP. You've got something you can option right away. Now, I will say this, early on, the pod companies weren't savvy to the whole, we're going to turn this into IP thing. They just thought narrative audio was cool. But then they started seeing it happen rapidly. Oh, people are optioning these and they're going to television afterwards. So most of the pod companies will not do a deal for those anymore without participation in the IP going forward. So, if you have a scripted narrative podcast and you do it with a Wondery and you sell it to HBO, Wondery is participating in that series, in perpetuity as well. In some degree. Now, to be negotiated depends on what's in the contract, but that's just something we're using a lot, and we're chasing rights all over the place. I'm kind of giving you my playbook, but I mean we're looking at articles. We find a cool article in a magazine, we can option that. Find some life rights to someone, we can option that. A book that no one's really doing something, do a rights check and option that. Is so much cheaper to be able to option some of those things than it is to try to create a script right away. That you're right. As soon as you got those rights, you're in the business, and you're kind of be able to shop it out because you're the owner of that. And you can get life rights, book rights for $5,000-$10,000. And that's a great nugget of advice on that amount.
He just dropped the mic.
All right.
Nick, that was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
That was a good answer for
Appreciate
me.
you being
I'm
here today.
soaked up all of that.
All right, so I'm going to end with a question, and then I'm going to try to jump to some of the Q&A because we've been getting a bunch of questions in the chat. But jumping off from the idea of sort of incubating the IP in an audio format, I know Chris and Nick, when I talked to both of you preparing for this, you talked about the other things that independent filmmakers need to be thinking about before they get started. We touched on that a little bit about getting things in line in pre-production versus waiting till the end to be thinking about who your attorney is going to be, different aspects like that. Will you kind of talk a little bit about how you see that process and where people need to be thinking about what leading up to and post-production, all the way through post-production?
Nick, do you want to start or me?
Go for it. Now, this is our little banter today has been you first.
Yeah, a little
then
banter.
I'll go. So let's keep going.
Well, I didn't want to assume.
Yep.
So in pre-pro, that's going to be the longest stage. It's going to be 12 to 18 months. But I do see a lot of times where you try to rush that, and I'm not really, I don't really have a problem with it as long as you hit the points. I'm the kind of guy that asks, okay, somebody tells me this is going to take 5 years, and I literally ask myself and our team, why can't this take 5 weeks? Like, what are the obstacles? What makes it take so long? Like, how do we remove steps that aren't critical and then focus on what is critical? So it's typically a long phase, but if you can speed it up, that's great. But the main thing is that this is where you're getting your cast attachment. You start thinking about your raise of funds. This is where you'd want to bring in an entertainment lawyer. You can bring it afterwards, but I think doing it in advance, so again, that you don't have a mercenary. And this is a word we use a lot because we have a principle at Bonsai: no mercenaries. You don't want to work with people who are just there to get your check or to get paid, because they don't care about your project and they don't care about you, for the most part. Will they do a good job? Maybe. But there's this whole thing of skin in the game, right? That's what you want to do. This is also where you're kind of building your script revisions and making sure your story is great. We haven't really touched on this yet, Jonathan, but your story needs to be great. So if you're a writer, it's really difficult to know. And there's a great Richard Feynman quote I always go back to, which is, above all else, we must not fool ourselves. We are the easiest people to fool. And I'm a writer, and I've had to be brutal with myself in terms of, is this good? Is this good enough to make? We rank these, we have readers, and we tell our readers, you can't give a screenplay a 7. No matter what, it's a bell out score. It's a score that if you go and pay a Hollywood reader, you guys can go test this out if you haven't already, your score will come back 7. They'll give you pros, cons, synopsis. It will always be a 7. A 7, you can't do anything with a 7. It's the epitome of average, but almost there. What you're looking for is a 9 or a 6, so that you know you're not there. You know you need a little help, a little bit more practice. You need to clean it up. So this is, this is kind of at the heart of, should you even be making a movie? Maybe you're in pre-pro and you figure out, maybe this is a series. Maybe I wrote a really long short film and this should be a short film. And that's a really great place for a filmmaker to start. So I think you're just working out, is this a feasible project? And do I have my players in place in pre-pro? Branding and marketing is usually where we see a lack of attention paid. There should be money set aside. So when we see a budget or a prospectus and it doesn't have any money set aside for branding and marketing, it's a really big red flag because, well, how do you think people are going to know your film exists? To Nick's point earlier, you have TikTok, you have YouTube, you have Instagram, you have Snapchat, you have every streamer in the world. There's just too much out there. It's a red ocean. It's the bloodiest of red oceans. So you have to figure out a way to make your work stand apart and to make it, I talked about this earlier, tentpole movies are tentpole movies because they're bigger than life. So how can you take your project and make it bigger than life? Or maybe, I know there was some stuff in the Q&A about documentary filmmaking. We love documentary filmmaking because it gives you a chance to talk about something that matters, something that's real, and your community can back you financially and in a variety of other ways. So in that way, in this other not so thought about way, you've made your film or your work bigger than life and a must see. I know we were talking about unicorns yesterday, Courtney. One of the ones I left out was Fahrenheit 9/11. It's one of the highest grossing films of all time, independent films of all time. And it's a documentary. Timing, the zeitgeist, the filmmaker, the community, everything aligned. And it was this just out of control blockbuster of a documentary. So, so once your branding and marketing is in place, you have the budget for that, they should get started right away. So that when you're shooting your film, you're getting stills on set. You're able to turn those stills around same days, just like you would if you had dailies where you're going to edit dailies. Like, go ahead and edit your still shots and put them on social. Because as an independent filmmaker, your film is probably, unless it's a horror, your film is probably not going to be the angle you should take from a branding and marketing standpoint. It probably should be you. Why are we watching your film? Why are you different, special? What are you up to? Especially if you have that diversity that people are looking for today, like you have a diverse story, then we'll brand and market you instead of the genre of your film or like the catch or the hook of your film. So those are a couple of things to look for there. I know you wanted to go through post.
Well, let me jump in. I'll jump into.
I can talk to that, but it's been a long answer already.
Well, let me jump into that because we've got about 15 minutes and I want to try to hit a few of these questions. But one of the questions says, from Jeffrey Spellerberg, said, Spider-Man's a franchise movie. That's the algorithm set up by MBAs for the studios, but what about distribution for independent producers? Can they fund that? So talk about specifically distribution. What's that look like for independent filmmakers? Do they have to sell their film to Netflix? What are other options? Are the film festivals, is that a done deal? Or the markets, are they over? Like, what's happening with that?
Yeah, and the festivals, so to go back to what I was saying earlier about when you go to a festival, the expectation to just, be discovered, it's likely gone, but the festivals are still very much alive. And, there's over 100, I believe, Academy Award qualifying film festivals, right? So when we talk about getting your film out there, it's all about, in this industry, it's really a lot about gatekeepers and people who will endorse you, right? So I think that, again, getting back into the process of filmmaking, you have to be thinking about who's going to endorse you. So that could be a film festival. that could be an influencer, that could be a community, right? That could be a number of different, it could be an actor or actress, right? It could be a director, a writer. There's someone in the industry that you're kind of going after to endorse what it is you're doing. So as far as distribution, there's so many distributors out there. I mean, there's just like, so it's kind of hard to be like, okay, well, you follow this path and you get distribution. It all comes back to what, some of the things that Chris was mentioning earlier. So again, you can go to a film festival. There might be distributors there that you can speak to. Chris, again, mentioned this earlier about going to the, was it AFI, AFM, the American Film Markets. So if you go to the markets, that is literally their purpose, right, is to try to sell your film. But before you do all that stuff, you have to know what it is you're selling and to whom you're selling, right? That's the key. So I take it all the way back to before we started the Make It podcast, and we were walking around with a handheld mic and asking people, what does success look like to you? And they said that we want to make a living doing the thing that we love, right? Okay, there's two parts of that. Just like there's two parts of film business, right? We want to make a living. That's the business side of things. Then there's the doing the thing that we love. That's the art. Okay, so if you're serious about the business side, and I would say, because I know we got some messages in the chat about budgets and things like that, we'll take a look at your budget. How much business is in your budget? That's the first place to start. Just start there, right? Do you have your lawyer in your budget? Do you have publicists in your budget? Do you have branding and marketing in your budget, right? Do you have, shopping or researching the film festivals to determine which one is best aligned with the thing that you're trying to do? Do you have, potential advocates or partners, from organizations, nonprofits, whatever, in your budget? Do you have these things that say you're going to go do the business of your film in addition to the making of your film? So again, the distribution part is, you can go to the film festivals, you can call the distributors or email them directly. There's a lot of them that are available online, and you can contact them. So there's all those options. But when you get to their door, if you're not prepared with this other stuff that we just mentioned, it becomes much more difficult to sell.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that really quick, Nick, just to amend to that. It's what we see is a shotgun approach to distribution instead of a shotgun approach to business. And do not do a shotgun approach to distribution. Don't do it. In pre-pro, or try to identify 5 distributors, maybe even 3, that are perfect for your film. Perfect. Like, you wouldn't like pitch a rom-com to Blumhouse, right? Like, same thing here. Like, what is your movie? Who are the 3 to 5 distributors that really align with you? And that will allow you to research them, because you won't want to be at a pitch and not know something about them. And you can figure out if there's red flags with that distributor or not. And then when you go there, it's a strategy and not like a let's throw it all against the wall and see what sticks kind of approach.
Yeah, and learn about their films and where they got those films from. Yeah, go ahead,
it's just like tailoring your resume for different job interviews, right? You don't just have one resume that you send to a retail job and a corporate assistant position. Like, you have specific resumes that you send to different jobs. You shouldn't just have one pitch for your project. You should have kind of specific pitches, highlighting different features that the different distributors would care about.
Thank you, Courtney. Another person asked in the chat, Ali Sultan said that they have a web series they're taking to the Starable Film Festival. They have some meetings with streaming services, and they have been told to bring a budget and an outline for season 2, but they wanted to know, what your thoughts were on what do they need to prepare for a meeting with the streamer, and how do they know what the market value of their web series is?
When you have a web series and you want to sell it as a regular series, you probably should have your story Bible done and know the ending. Like, it should be beyond season 2. So I know what they're asking for. In this case, don't do the minimum. Go ahead and know how the entire story ends, what the complete story arc is. Have your story Bible ready, and make sure you have season 1 completely written. They're going to want you to have the first season all the way done. I would say that, and then just what Courtney said before, like go ahead and prepare unique pitches for each of those 3 streamers. It's so funny because there's all the color that happens in between human interactions, and especially in film. And when you really boil it down, reduce it to brass tacks, it comes down to, especially with decisions with money, it comes down to, do I believe you can do this? And do I trust you? And can I make money while you make money? And if you
The
can
other
answer
thing I
those 3
would-
questions effectively, you're gonna win. Sorry, go ahead, Court.
Oh, no, the other thing that I would recommend just for you, Ali, would be bring whatever contracts you have in place at this point, because Netflix is going to want to know who has to be attached, not Netflix, sorry, whoever you're pitching to. I've used Netflix too many times in this conversation. Whoever you're pitching to is going to want to know the whole package that they're signing on for, right? Because it's not necessarily just, oh, you're getting my IP and you can go create this new thing, no strings attached, just pay me my money. If you have deals with the actors, if you have deals with the writers, you know, whoever wrote the songs, because you said it's a musical, right? What rights do you have and what obligations do you have? Because anybody is going to want to know the whole package that they're buying into.
Courtney, one thing I noticed, Ali said that those songs are already on Apple Music and Spotify. Does that impact anything?
You know, it could. It could. It depends on who you're pitching to. I mean, at this point, like the cat's already out of the bag, right? You can't shove it back in. So as long as you're very clear with whoever your potential distributors are, that's an issue, you know, they might say, please don't put any further songs on, because a lot of times what I'm doing a deal with Apple, and one of the things it's like a musical comedy situation. And one of the things that they were very specific about was, we want the songs to be released on Apple contemporaneously with the episodes going on the Apple TV platform, right? So you watch the episode and then you can buy the song or stream the song. So I do recommend that maybe don't put any more on. But but at the same time, if it's doing really well, then that's another, it's potential leverage, right? Look, these songs are doing really well. We've got this audience who's already into our music. Like if that's the case, then maybe it's helpful, but maybe stick with the 15 songs that are already there, at least until you get further input on how a potential distributor would want you to handle that moving forward.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, that's
point.
brilliant.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's really great because it's a smart question by you, Ali, because it's I've seen investors walk away from filmmakers at the implication that they didn't have rights to certain songs or things like that. So
Yep.
Anytime there's like gray area presented in any way, a lot of investors are just going to run to the door. The buyers is like, oh, we're out of here. There's something underneath that rock and I don't have time to lift the rock.
Yeah,
So
the
let me just
goal-
go find the next person that doesn't have any of these issues.
Yeah, the goal is to increase confidence and minimize doubt.
Yeah. That's exactly right. You said something earlier, by the way, Courtney, too, that I just wanted to mention. You said that Netflix was doing these teen series because they're so inexpensive to make. And I just wanted to give you kudos on such an incredible and underthought about point. They were using second to fifth mover advantage on that. They let Hulu make all those shows for 2 or 3 years, and they completely exposed the model, and then they copied them. So shows like East Los High and Everyone is Doing Great. Netflix is like, oh, so that's how you do it? Got it. We'll do it better.
Yep.
Well, and there's a whole like talent roster at Netflix now of, you know, these kids who have been in these rom-coms and now they're getting you know, I don't want to say actual movies, but movies that aren't
Bigger
just
ones.
these, these little, these quick, cheap Netflix originals. They're getting jobs in the world. But because they happen to be on a show or on a movie that was an original Netflix production.
Yeah, but I think there's room for this. I think, like for us, Chris and I have been involved in what we really believe is a date movie, right? We really thought it was one of those that really should have been promoted that way. But of course, we learned the hard lesson that the distributors were not going to promote us, right? It was like, that's all the work that we had to do. But there is room. I think there's so much room for those types of movies where it's just like, it's just about love. It's just about friendship. It's just about relationships. And I think the same is true for the children's movies. Again, I'm in the same boat. I've got kids, and man, it is so hard to find content we can watch. It's like we have to wait for the next Disney movie to come out. And I've seen some of them lately. I'm not necessarily, over the moon about all of them. So it's like, where else is it true that Disney has kids movies on lockdown and no one else is making them? That can't be a thing, right? So I think there's a lot of room for, I would not just say children's content, but family content. I think there's a gap, there's a chasm, and we're waiting for some people to come out and create that type of content.
But is that gap going to be filled by theatrical releases or by content going straight to the streamers?
And I think it could be a combination of the two, right? Because, and it's going to take a change. It's going to take a game change, right? And this is, I think, why Chris and I try to get out here and have these conversations. It can happen if we agree, let's say like the folks on this call, hey, let's get together and take our families to see this movie. Just have that conversation. Let's do that. Let's make that happen. Let's make that a thing. It's never been a thing before, right? It's been a thing that I take my family. Well, what if independent creatives were to say, hey, let's take our families to this local theater and watch this family movie that we can all get around.
Yeah, it's low stakes and it's low bar. It's easy.
Yep, exactly.
One text message.
Well, I got one good question here about, so Tanner Grandstaff asked, recently started a production company, Aberration. I'm interested in applying for a small business loan for startup costs. Is it uncommon to apply for business loans to fund a particular production like an indie short, TV pilot, etc.? What's that look like?
You can go to the bank. You're going to get a lot of no's because, every film is an LLC. But then when you go through the loan process, you are going to absolutely be taken to the ringer. I mean, you're going to have to come up with so many forms of collateral.
Yep.
And different hoops to jump through. Now, full disclosure, I know a little bit about this because I've had a real estate firm for 20 years, and we've done everything from home flips to new construction. And when you take any type of loan, you need to be prepared, be ready, because it's going to be harder than you think, and you're going to have to endure some no's. Now, there are certain banks that are designed for entertainment, like they give entertainment, that's their job. And so they're looking at it from a different lens. They want to know, is your film going to be bonded? They want to know who is attached. They want to know, have you done any pre-sales? Do you have any buyers on the other end that would write a letter of commitment on top of the normal sort of thing? But yes, it's possible. Yes, independent filmmakers don't try it enough. I think they need to try it more. Because why? Why do I say that? Because usually your equity investor is your mom and dad, or your sister, or your cousin, or that coworker, or all of them. Well, when your film doesn't do well, you still have to go eat dinner with them. It's really tough. It changes Thanksgiving forever. Like, you don't want to do that. Like, so take it from a stranger. And then if you lose the money or it doesn't do well, it's on the LLC. Again, have a lawyer. They can tell you what kind of structure you should have, but it's on the LLC and it's not on you as a person necessarily. So yeah, you should do it. Just be ready for the no's and have thick skin.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Mhm.
And so that's it, y'all. We are at 4:30. We're at 4:29. So I think the only last thing I'm gonna ask is I'm gonna go around and ask everybody if you could give one piece of advice for filmmakers that are on this call, probably a lot of independent filmmakers, what they need to be thinking about in terms of how they're going to recoup the money that they've invested, how they're going to make a profit. What's the one piece of advice you'd want them to take away today? Nicholas, I'm going to go to you first.
Oh, look at that. I get to go first. It's crazy. Well, I think I'm going to try to keep it simple so that it's very high level, right? Because it's an overarching, gets back to what I said before about the film business. It's like you have to think about it as a business. If you're not capable or willing to think about it as a business, get partners who are capable and are willing to do so. We totally understand that many of the creatives out there, that's your heart and soul, is the art of things. You may not want to get into that side of things. You may not, again, have the skill set to do it. But if you're trying to make a profit, if you're trying to identify opportunities for revenues, then partner with those folks who have those skills. Independent filmmaking does not mean that you have to be the jack of all trades and the master of none. This is all about community, right? This is all about, again, no mercenaries. Bring people into your circle, onto your team, who can do the things that you cannot do, or not willing to do, but understand that you need to do in order to be successful. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Nick. Chris, final piece of advice.
I want to borrow from the creative community that we work for and that has been so gracious in supporting us. And a couple of quotes that were given to me that I really have taken in and internalized. One is that the brain still scans the horizon for wolves. The brain still scans the horizon for wolves. So even in this modern day, that's the case. So we are instinctually cautious. We're afraid. We want to be safe. And that's okay, but you have to overcome that instinct. And then filmmaking is the ultimate collaborative sport. It is certainly a weak link sport. So the weakest member of your crew is probably the best you're going to be. And so the great Catherine Hecht, who is the executive director for the AV Film Fest in Sonoma County, and was Forbes boss lady of 2020, said this. She said, all rowers must look for rocks. And so it really supports our non-mercenary viewpoint and principles. And if you're on that boat with me, we are all looking for rocks. If you're rowing with me, let's look for the rocks. Let's work together and make something really brilliant in the world.
Thank you, Chris. And Courtney, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts. This is kind of my general life philosophy, and I think it makes sense as a lawyer. Hope for the best, but always prepare for the worst case scenario. And that is why in these cases, having a lawyer who is looking out for what is the worst case scenario, what happens. I'm not saying everybody go out and get a lawyer if you can't afford it, but it's worth it. You need someone if you don't have the foresight of what could happen, what could be bad, you need someone who could do that for you. So I think, we're all kind of saying the same thing. It's a team, and you need to have a team that you trust. And one of those people needs to be thinking, what's the worst case scenario, and how do we prepare for that and try to stop that from happening.
Thank you, Courtney. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone in attendance. I'm seeing a lot of gratitude pour in the chat. A lot of commendation to everyone on our panel. People are really appreciative of all the information you've shared today and the high quality, high level, and in the details perspectives. So we appreciate you all being here. Thank you to the Tennessee Entertainment Commission for sponsoring this webinar series. We appreciate them and all they do for the state. Be on the lookout for that next announcement about new incentives for filmmaking in Tennessee. And check out our website at the Arts and Business Council, abcnashville.org. We run the Volunteer Lawyers and Professionals for the Arts for the state of Tennessee. So if you can't afford a lawyer, contact us and we'll try to help you get some pro bono
That's
assistance.
awesome.